pleasure to be here. And what wonderful two previous presentations. I mean, they're just fabulous. So Ann and Josh and his mom, just wonderful, wonderful. I sure enjoyed those. I'm sure you did. And I hope that what I have to say will dovetail with their message of hope and possibility. So let's take a look. I think it was set up well. And I want to introduce you to 5 people that I've known over the years. Mike, Jenny, Marcy, Kim, and Phyllis. And the unique thing that they share is if we looked at how fast their hands work, they're unemployable. They're going to have a life of just lack of possibility and all of the things that a non-working life bring. I mean, I'm not saying they couldn't cobble together possibilities in the community, but having a working aspect of one's life is really a powerful, powerful thing. And yet, if we continue to simply use the procedures that we've used over the years, your country or mine, we're not going to get a whole lot further. And it's important to think about these people individually, but it's also important to think about all the people they represented. It's important to think about our own attitude toward this idea of the possibility of employment. And I wouldn't have introduced them if these people had not been able to break through the barriers that had been in front of them. And they all share common barriers. They share the reality of a very negative assessment or evaluation. And even though I've only been in your country a little while, I'm afraid we share something very similar, and that is we just focus on trying to test and compare the abilities of people to these standards. And along with that, the more disability and the more impact of that disability people have, the lower our expectations have traditionally been. We've not been simpler about that, more focused about that, and just said, why not have pretty much exactly the same expectations, not in a comparative way. And see, that's where I think we get lost in this. If my expectation of a decent life, I'll just apply it to myself. If my expectation was to make a huge amount of money, I'm an abject failure. I mean, it's just, because other people have made a lot of money in their lives. So it occurs to me that there are other ways to have a decent life, and if we set our expectations for that, then it becomes possible. And then there's demands of open employment. Now, one solution is self-employment, and I'm very much a fan of that. I think that needs to be customized, and I would say that as I listen to Josh's business, that's absolutely customized in every way to meet his needs and the needs of the workplace. But many people would also like to opt for wage employment, a regular, predictable wage relationship. And in fact, that's what most of us do. And when we look at the typical way that people get jobs, it starts automatically with productivity requirements. As job descriptions get developed by employers, one of the first things they have in mind is how fast is this person going to do the work that they do. And it's a reality that if we buy into that as the only way to think about employment, then we're going to have a large group of people left out of the possibility of work. And also, if all we're doing is comparing with others, then again, the impact of disability, particularly the impact of significant disability, is such that that comparison just doesn't equal opportunity. I hear from employers all the time, don't you know, the worker of today has to multitask. I mean, It's such an interesting word, and I think sometimes we almost believe our jargon. I have never personally been able to do two things at once, and any attempt in doing that, and I feel like I'm a fairly capable person, but if I'm on the phone and driving, I am a danger to myself and others. Don't get anywhere near me. That's multitasking, folks. And we tout it as some sort of reality that people then who have disabilities can't do. Occurs to me they'd probably be pretty good drivers because they're not very good multitaskers. And, that's good with me. I'm fine with that because we have these, and I say not so much with ourselves, but even society. If we start believing that people actually multitask, instead of do the task they're supposed to do, then it's going to end up being a negative perspective for people that we're trying to work with. And we all know how difficult credentials are. And I'm all for education. I've had more of it than most people should ever have thought about. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But I think that the notion that credentials around education are necessarily factors of people doing quality work, I just don't see it. And so if people are really going to get access to employment, who then all experience the barrier of significant disability, the real impact of disability, we've got to do things very, very differently. So let's take a look at the 5 people that I showed you. And I'll just do a little bit of a story for each one, and I'm going to save Marcy for the last. But the man on the top left is a man named Michael Holzenbeck. And Michael is not able to move any part of his body on his own volition, except for his head, and even his head and his neck are not very much under his control. And he has had a career. It's just an amazing thing. Now, he needed a lot of technology, but I remember in a plan for Michael's employment, a counselor who had assessed Michael got so upset. She had his assessment report on the table, and in abject frustration, slammed it on the table, looked at all of us and said, "Who are you kidding?" Michael, she looked right at him. He understood what she was saying. "Do you really think you can move fast enough to do data entry? This report says you do data entry at 3% of productivity." And Michael goes, "Do you think that this is wrong?" And he goes, And he couldn't say it, but then she asked what shouldn't have been a rhetorical question. "Well, how do you think you're going to get a job then?" And it's an interesting issue. I'll tell you, Michael's career was in data entry, but it wasn't based on productivity. It was based on the customized approach that we talked about yesterday. He found a public entity, and the equivalent, I guess, if this was Melbourne's City Hall, of working in City Hall because people weren't getting all of their jobs done, and Michael made sure that he backed them up by getting jobs done. And now he needed a lot of technology, but the fact is that when you're meeting an unmet need, productivity isn't nearly as important. I want you to parse that phrase, unmet need. The unmet part means someone didn't do it. The need part meant that whatever somebody had been paid to do, people who don't experience disability largely, whatever they had already been paid to do had not gotten done. And folks, if you think this is just a factor of the southern tier of the United States, you're wrong. I bet we could go into any business, the city of Melbourne, across the country, in any of your states, and find a host of unmet needs. And when employers have the opportunity to think about that, employers don't think that way by and large, they then begin to change. In the upper right, Jenny spent most of her life with Crayola and plain paper, just making designs, and never had thought about doing anything. But her 9-year-old brother, Joey, suggested during discovery that, with the simple question asked of a family, what does your sister do better than anything? And Joey raised his hand and suggested, my sister opens Christmas presents faster than any of us in our 10-person family, 8 children and 2 parents. Now think of how often that little skill goes overlooked. But folks, if you can open a Christmas present, you can open a box in a business. Just translate it, be bold. And if it's determined she can open a box in a business, we're already most of the way there. Now we just need an employer that needs boxes open. But what if we looked at life and saw all the possibilities of the things people do day in and day out that go overlooked, and we start translating those to possibilities? The task list of people's lives could be huge. They've got a new resume, not based on disability, but based on all these tasks they can do. Then just go out and find an employer, like Jenny's employer, who needed boxes open to keep a machine in operation. An operator would put, those are baseball caps. It had the emblem of the Navy ships being built in a nearby shipyard to our community. We thought that was pretty cool. And an operator running a computer-assisted embroidery machine would prepare the caps, put them all in the machine, then robotic arm would pick them up and place them in front of the robotic control needle, and you would have USS whatever on the front of the cap. And she would run all those out, and then she'd shut the machine down and open more boxes and prepare more caps and then reload the machine. So, and for years, the employer just did it that way until one day a job developer suggested, do you have any needs of boxes being opened around here? Because we've got somebody that is an outstanding box opener. And he got to thinking and showed us this machine. And he said, you've just caused me to think. Why do I have to shut this machine down? If I could keep it running, it would be worth it. But we weren't sure Jenny would have the productivity to keep up with the machine. And he said, no problem. She can just come in on a different shift when the machine's not working, so she can always be ahead of the machine. No matter, all he cares about was enough caps to keep the machine in operation. I told Kim's story yesterday for those of you that were here, so you'll remember her perspective about doing data entry, but doing it at a level that was just not competitive for the company, but having the quality to do tasks that help people do their jobs better. Phyllis, on the bottom right, had always wanted to work in dietary area with her friends who happened to work at a county hospital in our country. But she had never had any dietary experience. She had never, cooking wasn't something that she knew how to do. She just wanted to work with her friends. That would make her very happy. So she was very interested because her friends were interested in dietary. And we approached the hospital because we knew that Kim had some areas of focus that if she really willed her fingers to carefully handle paper, that it wasn't that big of a problem for her. She couldn't do it fast as you would want her to do it if she was doing a production task. But we asked the hospital about unmet needs, and that hospital thought about it and said, we developed something about 6 months ago and nobody's doing it. And what we found was that there was a problem with patients in hospitals getting the wrong meals, because you'd get these dietary carts that would be assembled in a cafeteria and then taken out to patient rooms. And if there wasn't a way to double check, it would be possible that, you just had heart bypass surgery and you're down south and you're getting grits and gravy, you're going to be clogged back up before you even get out of the hospital because you got the wrong meal, you know? And so they developed these stickers so that the dietary, the transport people could actually check before they gave you the tray in your hospital room. They could check and say, this is yours. And not only that, it's yours, it's got your name on it. That was easy. But the meal that's supposed to be there is actually yours. Well, guess what? The people in the dietary department didn't do it because they thought it was an extra step. And all the effort of putting this together wasn't paying off. Phyllis comes in and meets the need. She actually constructs all the patient menus. Never a day of training in dietary, but she wants to be there. She's got the skills, and now patients are much safer. And then Marcy, the woman in the middle, Marcy very much changed my life about employers paying people for contribution. When we started Discovery with Marcy in Fort Worth, Texas, I asked her mom, Elaine, a simple question. What does your daughter do? And she started crying. And she said, does she have to do something? And she knew what I was getting at. I just wanted to know what her daughter interacted with. Marcy's disability is such that at 23 years old, she had never made a volitional movement in her life. In other words, she had never, well, that's not exactly true, because she could avoid some things. If you had a fragrance that she didn't want, she'd turn her head. But if you wanted to ask, did she pick up a doll or a ball or a fork or a remote control, it doesn't matter what it is, a piece of clothing, nothing. She had never interacted with an object in her environment intentionally. And Marcy worked for 12 years. 12 years at pay well above the minimum wage. And for that to happen, we had to look at first just what could she contribute? You don't go to an employer and just say, Marcy's a lovely young person and she would really enhance your workplace, which by the way she did. But that's not a contribution that you pay somebody for. That's like a mascot. What could be a task she could do? It's very difficult for us to figure this out. And we had to really look at even Marcy being present. I mean, this is a very interesting thing, that Marcy's disability was such that even her mom said, my daughter's not always with me. She's physically here, but not always emotionally here. Well, when is she, Elaine? Oh, that's a good question. Around music and certain fragrance, and only certain music. And when you think about those things, that's not much to go on to get you to a task that someone's going to do in a workplace that an employer is going to pay for. And through a fragrance didn't work out, music did. And this is just an interesting kind of way of being very creative about an issue that's in front of you. We figured that given Marcy's what we call conditions for success, she would be best off in an office. It's temperature controlled. She gets to sit down. She didn't have to move around a lot in an office. So with that, then we started thinking about, well, what do people do in offices? Well, they do data entry. That's probably not going to work for them. They take phone calls. That's probably not going to work for them. They do copying. Maybe not right now, maybe in the future. And it got really simple. Things get stapled in offices. Even in the modern time, even in a digital world, things still get stapled. And could we set up a stapler with a simple switch and a stapler that would then allow Marcy to first be assisted to staple, and even to say, Marcy, okay, here's the deal. You're going to go to work. I want you to think about this. See, this is really understanding the value of work, because if you're looking at Marcy and you say, Marcy Garvin, do you want to go to work? Those words don't resound with her. I'm sorry, they don't. Maybe they do, but I don't know how to hear it. And her mom didn't know how to hear it. her family. So it's like, so what do? Do we think, okay, she's not for work? But see, she's a citizen. She's an adult. People who are adults go to work. She'd never be forced to go to work. But it's a better idea than all the other stuff, laying in a crib for the rest of her life. And a lot of folks of Marcy's ilk have laid in cribs. They're laying in cribs today somewhere. And so we kind of said, well, Marcy, we're going to think about work for you, and we'll try our best not to screw it up. We know you can say no. We don't know how to have you say yes. The only way you can say yes is to be a part of it. So that's how it went. We figured out that she would need a work task personal assistant. You see, we don't begrudge people who need personal assistance in toileting and eating and those sorts of things. But we have begrudged people getting work task personal assistance. Unless you're Stephen Hawking, of course. See, if you're Stephen Hawking, we don't begrudge Stephen Hawking writing a book and having somebody put the paper in the printer, because Stephen can't do it, okay? But he's really smart, and he's, world renowned. Well, if Marcy could get what Stephen Hawking gets, then maybe she can work. If you think about it that way, we did that argument with our federal government that funds a lot of disability services, said, well, we don't have a term for that. Good, let me give you a term, a work task personal assistant. Marcy will do as much of the task as she possibly can do, and her personal assistant will do the rest. So in this case, the personal assistant puts the paper in the printer, Marcy hits the switch. But she had to have the music to even be the reason to be there. See what I'm saying? I mean, Marcy didn't even know why she would hit a switch, because she had never hit a switch. So at first, she had to gently be assisted to hit a switch. And this young woman who had never made a volitional movement in 23 years, one day, within 2 months, starts reaching out and touching a switch. Why? I don't have any idea. I just know she did it. And she never didn't want to either. She never, when her hand was touched, she never pulled her hand back. Was always, I'm there with you, okay? And then we went from that to shredding. I mean, just a creative use of a defunct printer as a paper handling device to put confidential documents in. Allowed Marcy to touch a switch. The printer here is cleared this piece of paper. The piece of paper is cleared, drapes into the shredder. She never has to touch it. A coworker can take these confidential documents. It takes all of about 20 seconds of that coworker's time, put them in the feed. Marcy starts hitting the switch. And she can go to work. In 12 years of work, she always made no less than $1 per hour more than her work task personal assistant made. Just to give you an idea of what her wages were. Never less than $1 an hour more than her work task personal assistant. So that's pretty amazing. Now, very, very sadly, Marcy died a couple of years ago. She had a life that probably spanned far, far longer than most people with her level of disability, and certainly far more important in terms of what she did. Because when she died, her co-workers celebrated her life. She worked for a newspaper, by the way, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Fort Worth, Texas. And her life was celebrated by her co-workers. That's an amazing thing for somebody with that level of disability. So as we're thinking about this, with customized employment and discovery, we have the two tools that we need to take it forward for truly employment for all. Thank you very much, folks.